If you were around in the 90s, then you know the name Tom Green. He was a comedian, he had the Tom Green Show, got famous for that. He was bold, he was daring, he was pushing the boundaries, bombastic perhaps, attention-seeking at times, but funny. There's a new documentary about him and his story called This is the Tom Green Documentary, directed by him. It just came out in 2025. I want to tell you why I think it's really important, why he's important, and why I loved and was moved by the documentary for reasons different than I thought I would love it. And I want to play the top 3 game, which is, he had a sidekick in the Tom Green Show called Glenn Humplik. That's his real name. And I want to play the top 3 game. If Glenn weren't around, if he didn't exist, who would your top 3 be to be the sidekick for Tom Green? And then I'll give you mine. So Tom Green's Canadian. He got his start in Ottawa, did like a local television type thing. If you don't know what that is, back in the day, they used to have local access channels because there weren't a ton of channels on TV like pre-1990 or 88. So in your city or whatever, you could have a TV show, and it would be, you could use their equipment and film in their studio and things like that. So he did that in Ottawa, jumped up to MTV somehow, and got famous for the Tom Green Show. Once he got popular on MTV, he really took off, and then he ended up making movies and things like that. Guest hosted on Letterman, in case you forgot. So he was really up there, and this is a time where there weren't a ton of talk shows happening, right? It's not like today. So there weren't that many. There was Leno and Letterman and Carson and Conan, and that was almost it. You did have like Tom Snyder before then, but that was more of like a chat show, like a Charlie Rose type thing. So in terms of talk show hosts, he was one of the few, but he did it in such a unique way. And you get the sense that he loved it. So he wasn't making fun of it, but he was kind of pushing the boundaries with the way he was operating and the skits that he would do. Like he would go into places and sort of poke sticks at people, not to get them mad or get them angry, but maybe a performance art perspective where you sort of get people thinking differently about what they're doing. Like, why are you're managing a Rite Aid, or you're a manager of a restaurant. Like, why? Like, what are you really? You know, like just sort of trying to get people, and usually people would get mad and kick him out. You know, that's what would usually happen. And that's probably what he was going for, I think, most of the time. But super interesting. So there were a few things that I loved about it that I didn't expect. One of them was I felt really nostalgic for it. You know how when you go back in time and you watch things that you were actually around for, you kind of feel a little bit like, oh my God, I was a part of something as an observer, watching history being made, something interesting and unique. It wasn't just like your run-of-the-mill TV show where you have setup, line, laugh track, setup, line, you know, it was something else was happening. And at the time, it kind of felt like, hey, it's a jackassy type thing. It's MTV. They're being wild, and everybody's young. And you know, I was in my late teens, early 20s back then, so I was having a ball. But it wasn't until later on, particularly with this documentary, that you sort of thought, oh, Jesus, this is really interesting. What's going on? He's pushing the envelope here. He's really like blazing a trail for people, and that was probably the most important thing that came through to me, was just how important this guy is in the timeline of American entertainment and culture, I think. There were also a couple of things that happened in the documentary that I either didn't really know or I had forgotten about. One of them was, of course, that he got sick, and that really kind of pushes the documentary into this interesting existential perspective, because that happened to him at the height of fame. His show didn't get canceled. He stepped away when he got sick, still married to Drew Barrymore at the time. And, you know, you see kind of a real shift in the mentality, because now he's had this experience and his comedy gets, that's when he starts making movies, and the comedy kind of gets a little bit more, I don't know, reflective or thoughtful, but still pushing the boundaries. The other thing that happened, if you don't know this or you don't remember this, but Monica Lewinsky, who was pretty much famous for, I don't know, I guess the polite way would be to say that she was taken advantage of by a powerful, corrupt politician. And the media just treated her terribly. I always felt bad for her because she didn't do anything wrong. She was just a person who got caught up in the moment or in an affair or something. And like, she had to like end up leaving because people were being very cruel to her. And they show some of those clips, you know, of like talk show hosts in particular, taking shots at her, thinking like, hey, this is just a person. And that's what Tom Green did that made me so, I don't know, moved, that he kind of befriended her. And they would go around and he just like sort of it felt like he put his arm around her and said, hey, well, let's do this together. And then he would kind of go back and forth with the press a little bit. And you could tell that she, in the clips at least, seemed very appreciative of it. I'd love to know if they still talk today or if they're friends or whatever, because it was really quite moving. And I felt like really, sort of endeared towards him and her because he did that. Because a lot of people, I don't know of anybody that was sticking up for her. I'm sure there were maybe a couple people that had a column or something, but he was a big name at the time to be doing something like that. And I just had so much respect for him for doing that. And it really sort of cemented the deal on him from my perspective as being this really interesting, pioneer, thoughtful kind of person, not just a comedian who's going around sucking udders from a cow in public. You know, there's something else there, more layers. So I think the one thing that I take away from this the most after thinking about all these things and watching it is just the impact that he had. You don't really realize sometimes the impact that things have until later on. Sometimes you feel them right away and sometimes it takes a while. And I felt it right away with him, but also it just grew so much more in the later years, especially seeing this documentary. Now, there were a few times in the last, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years where he starts showing up on podcasts like Rogan or, different podcasts talking about how those people were all inspired by him with his Webovision show. For me to think that, well, he's just not a comedic icon. He's kind of like a, almost want to say like, people are not going to like this because I think some people don't really think he's funny, or, at least in the 90s, it was kind of, there were two camps kind of about him, but I really think he's in sort of like a pantheon of comedic minds, at least. If you didn't think he was funny, I think you at least have to kind of appreciate the fact that he blazed a few paths. So, watching that and thinking about all these things, making me nostalgic for the 90s, what a time. So to do all these things that he was doing, it's even more impressive because he didn't just flip on his phone and make stuff. You had to have equipment, you had to have access, people to help you do things. It was a simpler time. And that's part of the reason why I love this documentary. It takes me back. Tom Green documentary, I highly recommend it. All right, so before we go, I want to do the top 3 list for Glenn Humplik. Now, he was the sidekick for Tom Green on the Tom Green Show. They reunite a little bit in the documentary. I had heard some rumors that maybe they had a falling out, so it popped into my head. Maybe, what if Glenn Humplik never existed? Who would your top 3 sidekicks be in the 90s? Are you ready? I'll give you mine, and then you can put yours down below. Number 3. I'm going to go ahead and say Randy Marsh from South Park. I don't know if the technology was there to make that happen in the 90s. Probably because wasn't Gene Kelly dancing with Jerry from Tom and Jerry in Singing in the Rain or one of those? So they probably could have done it. Randy Marsh, South Park. You got to love that guy. All right, number 2 would be Corky Pigeon. Now you're saying, who's Corky Pigeon? All right. Freddie Lippenkottleman, Silver Spoons, the glasses, Ricky's friend. I think he'd be a great sidekick. I mean, you can't say Jason Bateman because he's so big, right? And maybe not at the time. I don't think he was big. He was doing Teen Wolf 2 and things like that. So maybe he would have been a good one. But it's got to be the right vibe, right? The sidekick, like, Andy Richter's a great sidekick, and Ed McMahon was a great sidekick for certain reasons. So I think Corky Pigeon would fit into that mold. Number 1. Janine Garofalo. I think she would have been perfect for a sidekick on the Tom Green Show. I just love her comedy. I think they'd have a great back and forth. It's very 90s, very singles, very what's the one? Reality Bites type thing. She's right there. throw in Janine Garofalo. But Glenn Humplik, I love you, buddy. You were great. This is just a fun top 3 game. It wasn't like who would do it better than Glenn. Nobody could do it better than Glenn. I'm just saying if Glenn didn't exist, it's a fun game. All right, put yours down below. Let me know if you've seen the documentary. Let me hear about it. I'd love to know what your thoughts are. Was I off? Was I way off? I don't regret anything I said, unless somebody points out something wrong, and I might go, oh, okay, whatever. But I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.